filling in for Renee Montgomery. She's the co-host of the Culture Calculus podcast. She's a sports and culture writer for The Athletic. Real talk, one of our great reporters, Kavitha Davidson. Kavitha, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, man.
Okay, listen, don't worry, everyone. I'm not going to lose control. I'm not going to scream bing bong a million times, but the Knicks are 5-1. It's the best start in quite a while. I've blacked out many of the early starts for the New York Knicks over the last 20 years. This one I plan to remember. Listen, it's a long season, okay? And a lot of things are still left to shake out. But, Kavitha, you are in New York City as we speak. What's the mood there like?
Well, let me tell you, the mood here is freaking out all the time. I have been to 2 games already this season, the Philly game and the Magic game. And I will say that in this very young season where the Knicks have played 6 games, I have been to the only loss. But we are also a fan base that is extremely used to hyping right before the season, no matter all of our instincts telling us differently. And then by December, throwing something at the television, right? And I think this year is going to be different. I think we're still going to have things to cheer for in December.
I think that you're right. Let's quickly go through the stats. So it's absolutely silly to be talking about offensive rating and defensive rating 6 games into an NBA season, okay? I acknowledge that. But the Knicks are currently 4th in the NBA according to advanced offensive rating from the Dunks and Threes analysis website. They are about middle of the league in defense, 19th in the league. So like off league average just a bit, which people expected them to slip defensively. But offensively has been the story. And I think they're doing it. If you look at their shot profile, the way they're getting those shots, I'm hopeful because it doesn't seem like someone no one expected to go off all of a sudden, like hitting 8 threes or so. It feels very sustainable. Now, there's some caveats there. Raptors are coming up later tonight. We're taping this on a Monday. Raptors have some injuries. They're coming off, wins against teams. Philly, for example, who are in the midst of their own drama that is clearly affecting that squad. Chicago, Zach LaVine had recently injured his thumb, was playing through it. That said, this is fantastic. This is great. Kavitha, this is great.
This is absolutely great. And to your point, it doesn't feel streaky because it's not just one player popping off. And I was like, this is one of the more evenly balanced scoring teams that we have seen 6 games into a season. The bench is doing well. Now, I will say down the stretch, you can still tell that this team is running out of gas in the 4th quarter. And they're,
yes.
when you are playing teams that aren't the Pelicans and the Magic, this is going to come back to bite you at some point.
Kemba is, I think if you look at Tibbs' pretty responsible manner in which he is handling Kemba, who of course struggled with left knee issues last season. I think that there is hope that even Tom Thibodeau can change. That said, listen, Julius Randle still tightens up in the clinch. He's still making some kind of head scratching decisions at times, but there's Evan Fournier, there's Kemba, there is the improved Obi Toppin, there's RJ, there's different players there to pick up the slack.
We are seeing Obi Toppin be what I think we've been promised. The kid, like obviously RJ Barrett had this like record-setting.
I love it.
This record-setting game for a kid as young as he. But at the same time, like you are like I think Taj Gibson, like this is ridiculous. But
right.
I think Taj Gibson has been a little bit rejuvenated by having Kemba there. And there's a great story about how they're like when they were on different teams, it would be like during a timeout or during free throws or something, and Taj would kind of shoot a look over at Kemba and be like, yo bro, like come home, and apparently there is something to be said there. I do think that if you're talking about Julius Randle and some head scratching decisions, one of the biggest things, just as somebody who watched this team day in and day out, that you saw that probably isn't reflected on a stat sheet, was hesitation to take shots that Julius can make and that he should be making. And you are still seeing that, and you're especially seeing that down the stretch. So that's something I don't know how Thibs fixes that, but that's something that needs to get fixed.
It was pointed out to me last season when Julius was kind of taken out of the playoffs. And in fairness to him, he was the sun, the moon, the stars, the entire gravity around which the team revolved last season. And if you took him out, then you weren't going to have much. Derrick Rose mainly is at the point of attack, and that's basically it, which isn't enough. That said, I think if you look at Julius's performances in big games going all the way back to college, this is a little bit of a through line for him in the closing moments, in the big moments. It's not to say that he chokes all the way. There's just a tightness somehow. And I think that's hopefully it's just reps, hopefully as the Knicks continue to play well, continue to have leads, continue to figure out how to protect those leads, that he gets better and more acclimated to being in those moments, which, to be fair to him, he hasn't been in a lot of over the course of his career. But I do hope it changes. And I love, the atmosphere outside of the Garden, as evidenced by the recent Side Talk NYC viral video, is fantastic. I don't want to, the Nets are going to figure their life out, but you can't help but contrast the vibe in the Garden and outside of it to the vibe at the Barclays, where you have a anti-vax protest populated by a bunch of people who probably could not name two people that play for the Brooklyn Nets.
Well, and I think this is a great allegory for, and listen, as Knicks fans, we have probably 2 weeks left to talk shit about the Nets, right?
That's why we have to do it now.
We have to do it now. The window is closing. But this is probably a good allegory for who we think of as the endemic Knicks fan versus the endemic Nets fan. Find me a Nets fan who existed before 3 years ago. Find me a Nets fan who can name a New Jersey Net, right? Are there a bunch of Kerry Kittles fans just walking around here? Yeah. But also, those people outside of Barclays were very clearly bussed in from Long Island and Staten Island. Those are not Nets fans. But yeah, it's weird to think about how in disarray this team is right now. And you gotta, I know we started this segment off, kind of making fun of KD. You gotta feel bad for him at some point, right? At what point are you man, I left Golden State for this?
To the extent that you could feel bad for a multi-millionaire who is one of the elite people in his job, I do feel weirdly bad for him. I think mostly I feel concern for the friendship between him and Kyrie, because that's got to be he came in large part because of the closeness, the closeness of their relationship and the fact that they talked it out and made this decision that they wanted to play together. And clearly at this point, Kyrie has other priorities, and he's free to have those, but they do not interact in a beneficial way with being part of a elite basketball team, for sure. And Katie's got to feel a type of way about it. He has to.
Well, I think you're seeing that frustration come out in some of the less put together moments on the court. And you're definitely at what point does Steve Nash's true colors really come through, right? Someone who is question. A player's coach, is keeping it together as much as he possibly can. But at what point does he just throw his hands up?
Yeah, it feels like I do wonder, and obviously there's a lot of behind the scenes political ramifications to being, talking about how you feel about a situation with regards to a player of Kyrie's stature who is a star and is clearly an important cultural force for that team, for good and ill. I will say the one thing that makes me wonder if we're gonna get more kind of brutally truthful comments from the Nets is the hardline stance that Nets owner Joe Tsai has taken. And it feels like, at least in the things that he said about Kyrie, last week he was asked about it and he said, no, I haven't spoken with him ever since this happened. And he's been quite open about like about his support for vaccinations and for the law in New York State and New York City that says that is the reason that Kyrie can't play in these games. So it feels like there is at least support from on high for being very out there pro-vaccination. We'll see what happens. It's a weird, can you imagine explaining to somebody in 5 years, like why the Nets as currently constructed did not win the title this year? If that is what happens, people talk about asterisks in sports all the time. This is one of the weirdest asterisks ever. If indeed the Nets did implode in some form or fashion.
All right. Well, so Jason, heading into this season, the NBA made some rule changes, particularly when it comes to fouls, in order to discourage, quote, overt, abrupt, or abnormal non-basketball moves. Now, basically, they just wanted players like James Harden and Trae Young to stop getting calls for fouls that were basically calls they were getting for jumping into a defender. And to no one's surprise, absolutely no one's surprise, Trae Young and James Harden are the two players having the biggest problem with these rule changes. So what do you think about these rule changes, the attempt to correct what some have seen as the softness of the game and the response that we've seen from players so far this season?
It's been noted on the internet that it's like the 90s are back, right? You've got the whistle is harder to come by. The Knicks and the Bulls are good. The Eastern Conference is better. And I think there's something to that. Listen, I think that clearly it has affected, James Harden, Trae Young, two players who I think everyone expected this to really impact. You're seeing James Harden's free throws drop precipitously. I think he scored 18 points over the weekend, but only on 4 free throws. He's only had 1 double-digit free throw game so far this season. I think those guys are too talented to not adjust, but it's clear that it's having an impact. I think the thing that's most interesting to me is how delighted everyone is that this is happening. There's a pointed schadenfreude vibe that is coming from different people in the league. Draymond Green recently said, "Can I also say how satisfying it's been to watch the game of basketball without all those bullshit calls?" and even from pundits and fans, you're seeing a lot of celebration of these non-calls. That part was notable to me.
Well, for sure. I mean, the schadenfreude has been off the charts. And I think those of us who did grow up with 90s smash mouth, true centers, muscling into the post, we do kind of love to see it. At the same time, you hear players like Steph Curry talk about just instinctually how it is hard to tell when a pump fake is going to be called and when it's not, right? You start talking to players who didn't grow up thinking about the way that and I don't think any player really grows up thinking about the way that they play in terms of launch angles, right? Nobody's thinking about that. So as good as Trae Young and James Harden are, and how incumbent it's on every athlete to adjust to things like this, that's a lot easier said than done. I think you do kind of feel for them at least a little bit.
The thing that I've been thinking about too is we're kind of reaching the philosophical limits of analytics in a weird way, 2 decades after the analytic revolution has taken over sports and baseball and, the NBA and football as well. We're beginning to get into these areas where, okay, maybe this is too much efficiency. Maybe free throws, hunting free throws. Yes, that's a great way to efficiently score points. You're stopping the clock and you're taking unguarded shots from a reasonable distance away. But
free throws are the highest leverage shots, right?
Yes. So maybe that's too far. And I think these are the similar conversations are happening around tanking and around, whether it's right to treat players as assets and less as individuals. I think these conversations are happening. I think this is one of the places where it's happening in an interesting way. Like, maybe this is too much. Maybe this is too much efficiency. Trae Young recently said there's a lot of missed calls. It's basketball. It feels like that they're learning and they're just, I don't know. It's frustrating. He's also said that, like, as a smaller guy, it's harder for him because, all the players are bigger and stronger. They can muscle him around, which to me is like, well, I don't know. Sorry about it. Like, I get that. I get that drawing fouls is a way to like to battle that, but it's kind of, you kind of have to deal with it, my guy. I'm sorry. I am really enjoying it. So his free throws have dropped over 4 a game from 8.7 to 4.3. Again, we're only 6 games into the season. But yeah, they will adjust. And the thing that I want to know is, does this carry through to the end of the season? Like we've seen before where the NBA has wanted to put things in, wanted to put an emphasis on certain calls, whether it be moving defenses, or what have you. And those things kind of fall away towards the end of the season. Do you think that they'll maintain this throughout the season?
Well, I think everyone just gets a little bit lazy toward the end of the season.
Right.
And I think that I say that a little bit facetiously, but not actually. I do also wonder, this is related to your question, like how much of this, like we're talking right now about Trae and James and all that, how much of this is actually taking the onus off of what has been bad refereeing? I mean, in on the one hand, they have been calling fouls that have been by the letter and maybe not the spirit of the law. On the other hand, we can all point to at least, a handful of instances in the last week where the calls have been inconsistent. So, are we misplacing blame? Are we expecting a rule to change something that is more systemic than the letter of the law?
I think probably yes. But at the same time, it feels like the cycle of sports in a large way is like reaction and counter reaction. So they made a rule change in order to deal with something that was in and of itself a reaction to or a result of an increased awareness of efficient scoring. So now they're trying to dial that back. So that will result naturally in some bad calls, which will have its own counter effect. And we'll see how that goes. But I think, again, we're seeing what is finally the high water mark of the NBA's drive for more offense in the wake of the kind of like rock fight, draw blood kind of culture of the 90s that was honestly, a lot of that was driven by the Knicks in probably a way that was bad for the league. So we'll see.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see that because at the same time, right? Like the NBA thrives when scoring is at a high. And it's always,
yes.
It is constantly growing at that clip. And at the same time, their own VP of referee development and training talks about, his name is Monty McCutcheon, talks about this rule change as an effort to help the defense play with as much passion as the offense. And it's an effort to find balance in this game. And it's just like, who are you actually kidding? Really? Are you trying to find defensive balance here?
I think that James Harden in particular is one of the most diabolical offensive players of all time. Like, to your previous point about are we excusing some bad calls, I would hate to have to referee a James Harden game because, like, if you break down that 2-footed gather move, it's technically, I guess, by the letter of the law, not a travel, and yet it looks like, smells like, and looks like it, and it quacks like a travel every single time I see it. And so these players, a lot of them are just the craft that they have and the way they apply it to tricking people. You got to rein it in. I love to see it. I do love to see James Harden and Trae Young taken down a notch, but I think they'll adjust. Again, they're too good to not adjust. Kavitha, over the weekend, we saw former President Donald J. Trump attend Game 4 of the World Series between the Braves and the Astros. Notably, in a lot of social media videos that came out, Trump is seen doing the Tomahawk Chop, which of course is a racist hand gesture that the Braves have yet to eliminate, and it seems as if that will probably never be eliminated. That be that as may. We know Trump uses sports fandom to stir stuff up, and it's been much more widely revealed that professional sports owners are significant donors to the Republican Party. We'll talk about that more. But first, I actually think this was good that he was there. That's my take on it. I will explain it further. But how do you feel about seeing our former president doing a terribly offensive hand gesture,
doing a racism
at the World Series?
Not terribly shocked,
right.
is how I feel about that. That was, I'm pretty sure, the express purpose of him showing up. I mean, the express purpose of Donald Trump doing anything is to garner attention for himself and to try and either for book sales or event or ticket sales, or in this case, all of the above, and with an eye toward Tuesday's elections. So I was not surprised. I think the discussion over whether he was invited or not was kind of hilarious, because nobody could really, I mean, MLB denied inviting him. The CEO of the Braves came out and said he kind of asked to be there, and we said, of course, yes. But this all kind of comes down to, well, who actually benefits from Donald Trump at a sporting event? And the only answer to that question is Donald Trump.
That I agree with. I have been watching with interest the kind of conversation around the chop that is, quite naturally and rightfully taken place because of the Braves are where they are. And I think something like this, what I mean by I think it's actually good, is now it takes away another layer of fig leaf or cover around this conversation, that people hide behind. If Donald Trump is out there doing the chop, he loves the chop. Well, here's one less defense that you can have for this not being an offensive gesture. Having representatives of an indigenous tribe who are, have financial stakes in and have financial relationships with members of Braves ownership, having them say, "Oh, the chop is actually great. I'm not offended by it." Like, all these ways that they can avoid having these conversations. That's why I like Donald Trump there, because now you can't avoid it. Let's talk about this. Here is Donald Trump clearly being a demagogue and doing this gesture that everybody says is that everybody related to the Braves is like, "Oh, that's fine. It's not offensive." What do we think about it now? What do we think about this now? Is this good now? Here is a man who called for a boycott of baseball at the World Series. He said in April, "Boycott baseball and all the woke companies that are interfering with free and fair elections. Are you listening, Coke, Delta, and all? Have this guy at the World Series." That makes a lot of sense. Meanwhile, where are all the voices that said, let's keep politics out of sports? Where are the Outkick people? Where are all these voices that want to say this? Where's the stick to sports people?
Everyone wants you to stick to sports until they stand to benefit from it. I mean, we're also talking. I mean, Donald Trump brought college football into the presidential debate, a couple of weeks before the election. Like sticking to sports has never actually been on the agenda. But I mean, I guess I see your point. I guess seeing him in the luxury suite doing the chop, what that forces us to do is acknowledge that, as much as we like to, as much progress as we've made on Black Lives Matter and athlete activism, and however progressive a small c conservative space like sports can be, the people at the very top are still, for the most part, big C donors, like big C conservative donors. A lot of them are Trump supporters. And there's kind of no way to hide from that. And we do kind of have to reconcile the fact that these millionaire players whom we love, who might stand for things that we agree with, are still working to put money in the pockets of these people we don't.
I could not agree more. The Rooney Rule is a good example of this, right? These sports owners don't do things because it's right. They didn't start supporting Black Lives Matter.
Dan Snyder didn't change his name. Like, he didn't have some come to Jesus moment, you know?
Exactly. There was no moment where like, you know what, I was wrong about policing, or, you know, like I was wrong about the history of this country. No, you got to force them to do it, and you've got to hit them in the pocketbook, which is where they make their decisions at, and you can't let them hide from things. And having Trump invited or not invited by MLB and Braves ownership at the stadium is, to me, not hiding from it. Like, let's just put it out there. These are the people you're dealing with. These are the people that you're hoping to see more diversity initiatives from. And this is the kind of landscape that we're dealing with. Like, none of this kind of marketing speak about, we value diversity in the workplace. Donald Trump is there. He was invited potentially by Braves ownership. Okay, now what do we do? Like, let's just have this stuff right out in the open. I prefer that. Like, the New York Knicks are owned by James Dolan, who is a loud supporter of Donald Trump and who forced the Rockettes to dance at to dance at Trump's inauguration. Like, this is Woody Johnson, ambassador to the UK. Like, this is a thing that happens.
Ambassador to the UK, who may or may not have been asked to schedule a tournament and sell a golf club.
Yes,
with an end toward Trump. So yeah.
So all of which is to say, I hate seeing Donald Trump. I hate him. I don't like seeing this man, but I like having this conversation in a way that is not bullshit. And I think when Donald Trump is at your stadium, it's kind of hard to bullshit about things.
It's hard to obfuscate, for sure. I have to believe, and he has made so many mistakes just in the last 4 days, let alone his tenure as commissioner. But I have to believe, as much as I think Rob Manfred is a little bit of a mess right now, he did not want Donald Trump at this game. He did not want the headache that came with these questions and the conversations that you and I are having right now. So given that, I just don't understand. I mean, there's so many things that are flying in the face here. So first of all, the night before, you have this beautiful tribute with Dusty Baker involved to Hank Aaron, to Henry Aaron's legacy. And you're completely spitting in the face of that by having someone, a president who has stood for white supremacy.
Yes.
In your press, in your owner's box during this game. And then I really don't understand where Rob Manfred is in being this full-throated in his defense of the Chop and of the Braves. Like, I really don't understand where this comes from. I mean, you're not even talking, the line that you heard a lot in the conversation about Washington was, and you heard this from fans and you heard this from Dan Snyder, and it was, this is our history, this is our legacy, this is the only identity as a fan that I've ever known. And all of that, I mean, we can talk about all the rest of that, but that's just not the case with the Chop. I'm 32 years old and the Tomahawk Chop is younger than I am. Like, this is not some long-standing part of Braves lore, right? In the 100+ years of the Braves. So I really don't understand why this is the hill that Rob Manfred is choosing to die on when he's got an impending labor strike on his hands and a whole lot of other things he's going to have to worry about.
Yeah, for a sport that is so concerned with growing its fan base beyond white men who are roughly 58 to 60, whatever. It seems like a mistake. That said, I guess, like, from the perspective of, I need to hold on to these fans in the Atlanta area, I could see where Manfred is coming from, but it is, it's clearly ridiculous. And I think it also, you bring up something good, which is something that it is infuriating to talk about all the time, but whether it's Stick to Sports or the Chop or whatever, there's a centering of the white perspective. This is our legacy. This is our history. Our history of, wiping out the indigenous tribes in the state of Georgia and forcing them to march. A forced march, which was later called the Trail of Tears. Like, that is part of the legacy too, but it's also a constant reframing of the bad things that have happened in this country in a way that makes them, takes all the edges off them and makes it so no one was ever hurt and no one was ever wrong. again, that is why, from that perspective, I at least appreciate that Donald Trump is there, because it leaves you no place to hide from the shittiness of these relationships.
It leaves you no place to hide, but I do something makes me cringe about how easily sports does lend itself to being used as, I'm sorry for this terrible pun, but as a political football. Yeah. Like, I think this about Kyrie all the time, too, when it comes to his anti-vax stance. Like, you probably don't agree with Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Tucker Carlson, but you are still being used as the poster boy here. Whether or not the Braves invited Donald Trump, whether or not Rob Manfred wanted the headache of having to talk about this, MLB, baseball is being used right now as an advertising ploy, essentially. And that's really a shame. And that's really, that's not where you should be going, especially if you're trying to grow your game beyond, as you said, white 50-plus-year-old. And I say this and it sounds like a joke, but people who still listen to the game on the radio, and that's not to knock the radio, but that is a literal business consideration. If most of your fan base is not consuming media the way that people 20 years from now or currently are consuming media, that is a problem. So I think that, this is probably the closest that I'll ever come to saying stick to sports, which is stop allowing your sport to be used according to someone else's agenda.
How does this end? Because with the Kyrie thing, it feels like, I guess I just don't know. It feels like in a lot of areas of life, and particularly the ones that have been kind of revealed by the pandemic, we're headed for some kind of a breaking point, whether it's, you can't continue to serve, say, for instance, okay, everybody has to be vaccinated, vaccines, you do it for the people around you, et cetera. But also we support someone's personal freedom to not get vaccinated. At some point, there's going to be a break there. And the financial interests behind teams are going to have to decide, okay, we care about which one of these markets do we care about more? With regards to MLB, it feels like they're going to have to say, okay, we care about growing the game, or we care about holding on to the fans that we have. Where does that go? What decision will eventually be made from that?
Well, I think to be extremely cynical, the immediate answer to that, the immediate explanation.
I love cynicism. I think it's I honestly think it's the best way to go when it comes to this.
I mean, especially when it comes to sports. But, if to all those people, and there are a lot of people who are saying this in kind of a bad faith way, but to all those people who are like, why did you take the All-Star game out of Georgia if you were going to, allow the chop and all of that? Well, the World Series wasn't in Georgia at the time. This is the time that you're going to be catering to a Georgia and Atlanta based fan base, right? Is when there are two teams left, and baseball is an extremely regional game, and you are catering to a fan base that is in one of those two teams in the World Series. Where it goes from here, I mean, listen, I'd like to believe, and there are some studies that show this, that fans do progress in a forward way. That doesn't have to necessarily be linear, but that if you look at it over time, like in a longitudinal way, more fans today believe that brands and teams should support Black Lives Matter than did 5 years ago. And that is the only reason that you have teams with entire D&I departments right now working on this. So I do think that it's going to be necessary for baseball to acknowledge that as this country moves toward a majority minority a demographic and population. At the same time, I don't know if I can say that same thing about football, for example, because football is just a money printing machine that honestly rests in its own conservatism. And I don't know what it could possibly take to change business practices there. But baseball's own business model has been threatened in so many ways that it will have to reckon with this eventually. And I don't know if it can survive another strike, frankly.
It's time for Buzzer Beaters, where we talk stories that we didn't cover in the show because of time. Kavitha, you get to go first, as this is your first appearance on the show. What do you have?
Well, I'm honored. Well, first of all, shameless plug. I am on the board of directors of the Yogi Berra Museum out in Montclair, New Jersey. And we do a lot of really cool educational programs for underserved kids in the Newark and Camden areas. But we, the last 2 years with the pandemic, we haven't been able to have any of our major fundraising events. So we finally got to have one. It was our charity golf event out in Montclair, New Jersey last week, and, met a lot of Yankee legends and a lot of Yankee greats, which was very exciting. But for you and me, Jason, probably the most exciting was I met Bernard King.
That's so
and, cool. Knicks legend, all of that. And he told this story, super personable guy. He told this story and he said, it was really early in my career and I didn't have any confidence. I think I was a rookie. So at some event in Philly and I saw the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life get out of the elevator. And I didn't have any confidence. So I couldn't really talk to her and anything. And I just kind of let the whole night slip away from me. Finally, at the end of the night, I got it. I got enough confidence. I built myself up to actually go and talk to her. And I introduced myself to her and I said, "Hello, my name is Bernard King." And she turned to me and she goes, "Hello, I'm Dr. J's wife." And for a comeback event, I don't think you can have a story to cap it off better than that.
That is fantastic. And one of the great what ifs in Knicks history is what if the Knicks had held on to Bernard after drafting Patrick Ewing? What could those two have done together? For my buzzer beater, I'm gonna just say Halloween. I think Halloween. I love Halloween. I love getting into costume. I love dressing up. I love putting on a mask. I love doing all that stuff. I can't help but notice that this Halloween, I don't know if it's the effect of TikTok and Instagram or what, but everybody's costume is really good now. The average costume is better than the average costume 8-9 years ago. And not only is it better in terms of put together well, quality of craftsmanship, but there's a playfulness. People will dress up. Gen Z people will dress up as as a C-list character from a sitcom that aired before they were born, or will be a character from a commercial that airs at 1 a.m. on NBA TV. And I just think it's really clever and great. I've seen some great costumes this weekend and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed Halloween. There, I said it.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed Halloween and I hope you didn't run into any blackface.
I did not. You can't do that around here. I live in Los Angeles. You can't do that. Come on, you get beat up. Please don't do that. And let me just say this from Kavitha and I, don't do that. Don't change the color of your skin to get into your Halloween costume. Just don't do it. Well, that's it for us. Follow and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, Kavitha, for hosting with me this week. Where can our listeners find you?
So I'm writing at theathletic.com. I co-host our podcast, Culture Calculus, and I'm on Twitter at Kavitha Davidson.
Yes. Don't forget to smash the subscribe button at youtube.com/Takeline Show for exclusive video clips and watch all of All Caps NBA, which comes out every Friday. Goodbye, everyone.